What do you have there?
Evangelion.
Neon Genesis Evangelion.
The 3.33 Rebuild movie is often considered to be the black sheep of the Evangelion franchise. On the internet, people are confused by the events of the story and the lack of explanation of what is going on. Often, people declare the movie to be bad and bring shame to the Evangelion name. However, 3.33 is the key to understanding what the Rebuild movies represent and sought to accomplish as a commentary on the entire Evangelion franchise. But, to be able to understand that, it is important to be familiar with the themes of the Evangelion anime and the movie End of Evangelion. Although the Monster of the Week story is engaging and fun, what people tend to forget is that the origin of the angels and their motive is overall inconsequential. Most of the information is actually in the PlayStation 2 game rather than the show itself, and it is not required to know because it is not the focus of the show. You can read Wikipedia for a greater understanding of the lore, but it is not that important because the themes regarding escapism and loneliness are its core. After episode 16, the narrative puts greater focus on the inner thoughts and loneliness of the characters as its main theme regarding self-identity. The general existential dread of loneliness and the inability to find happiness becomes the principal unifier of all the main characters. Shinji lost his mother at a young age, and his father abandoned him. Asuka was forced to grow up at a young age, relying only on her abilities to suppress her loneliness through a sense of superiority and never showing any weakness. Rei is a clone with a soul, forced to lose her memories every time she dies, and was raised to never have a grasp on her emotions by living secluded from human connection. Her soul becomes in conflict with her desire for connection and her desire to return to emotional nothingness. Gendo could not accept other people loving him because he had no pride in himself, thus keeping his distance from others on an emotional level and running away. Misato indulges in hedonistic acts, such as drinking and sex, to escape the dread of death and loneliness. Ritsuko hides her loneliness in her work, and gives herself completely to Gendo, yet is unable to find fulfillment in that servitude. This culminates in the finale of the show, where each of the characters is forced to see how other people interpret their identity and that it is in contrast to their true self. Shinji learns that everyone's identity is subject to this misinterpretation, and therefore, any view of him is inconsequential. The slice of life fantasy segment shows to Shinji that any future is possible for him, not just the one he has undertaken to please his father and earn the approval of others. His identity as an Eva pilot is not the only possible path he can take. It makes Shinji accept that he can live for himself by forming his own identity and find happiness. However, the End of Evangelion movie removes the self-realization from the show and recontextualizes the finale by putting Shinji in a more intimate need for human connection after killing Kaoru. He starts demanding a comatose Asuka to hate him, to validate his existence, leaving his base sexual urges as the only means of attachment to her. Throughout the anime, Shinji was never shown to be openly sexually frustrated, sometimes showing a desire for intimacy with Asuka, but this recontextualization emphasizes Shinji's desire to connect with others at his lowest. After Rei merges with Lilith, Shinji is given the ultimate choice that determines the fate of mankind. This leads to 4 dream sequences that take place within God Rei that fundamentally examine and judge Shinji's ego and identity. The first is his desire as a child to have something of worth by following other people's wishes and desires. Shinji references the cello where he was told to play but was never told to stop. He becomes frustrated that following orders gives him no meaning or pride when no one is around to appreciate his efforts. It leads him to have destructive impulses that cause him to resent his own achievements. The second dream sequence shows Shinji seeing Misato's true self, with her loneliness and hedonistic urges. It shows the truth that, in the end, we are all affected by our base desires, all originating from a craving for human connection. The third dream sequence is on the train, at which point Shinji learns that people are unable and unwilling to even try to show their true self to others, because truly being open makes you vulnerable and more susceptible to be hurt. And by not being able to know the true self of others, it creates a sense of ambiguity and inner anxiety that cannot be resolved. By being unable to truly connect with people, it makes Shinji feel lonelier and hate himself even more. This culminates in the final dream sequence where Shinji shows the core of his being to Asuka. His desires to help others and obtain their approval is a half-hearted attempt in the hopes that people will love him back. Shinji thinks that if he can be altruistic to others, it will give him meaning in life and remove his loneliness. But this shows the truth of his heart. He will love anyone if they love him in return, and therefore, he loves no one. He is simply using others as a means of escapism instead of loving himself first. This becomes Shinji's final cry for anyone to love him, to form any attachment to him even though he has nothing to offer in return. To which Asuka refuses. No one has any obligation to live for your sake or to accept you simply because you exist. Unable to accept absolute loneliness and find any justification in being alive, Shinji is consumed by nihilism and destructive impulses, strangling Asuka. If people are unable to properly love or be loved by anyone else, then everyone should just die. Instrumentality grants the ultimate wish fulfillment fantasy of being understood. And in embracing that desire, Shinji has doomed all of humanity, and the barrier that protects people from showing their true self to others is removed. Instrumentality has merged everyone into a single soul. The choice has been made. People cannot live by themselves and face loneliness. But then, at the last moment, Shinji realizes that his desires are rooted in a hatred of reality. By removing human boundaries, anxieties and rejections would end, but at the cost of being alive. Escapism and dreams are not good because you do not exist in those dreams. You can only exist in reality. Escapism can only act as a relapse. They are illusions and are not a means of living. Identity can only be formed by existing, accepting reality completely, and living in it. And so, Shinji separates himself from the collective, caused by instrumentality, accepting loneliness and the possibility of suffering. Mutual love is ultimately based on mutual misunderstanding and the inability to fully understand others. But even in that ambiguity, love is still possible. Whether or not Shinji has learned this truth is put to the test in the final scene of the movie. Although Shinji desires to form a connection, he is unable to show his feelings and, echoing the dream sequence, strangles Asuka in order to find validation for his existence. And Asuka, understanding that Shinji desires to be accepted, shows an act of compassion for his loneliness and acknowledges his existence, despite hating him. People can never truly be open with each other, but forming relationships is still possible and worth pursuing, even if some pain is involved. This general overview serves to show the themes and philosophical statements that the anime and movie attempted to communicate to the audience. All the main characters desire one way or another to escape their loneliness and hate reality. As a result, they all live unfulfilled lives by endlessly relying on others or running away to be protected from pain. Happiness can only be sought by first accepting reality in all its suffering and benefits, and then by accepting that you are alive and conscious, and that you are worthy of living. Without fully embracing reality and declaring, "I choose to stand up for my right to exist, to value myself and to treat myself with respect," no one can ever truly live or find happiness. The core message being directed at the audience acts as a warning. Do not indulge in any kind of escapism. All desires for escapism originates from a hatred of reality and a lack of self-acceptance. By relying on others, indulging in your desires, or running away, you are merely seeking an escape from reality rather than embracing it. Understanding the theme and core message of the Evangelion anime and the end of Evangelion movie is important because, ironically, the audience did not listen and dive deeper into escapism. The Evangelion franchise itself became a means of escapism, and subsequently, anime followed its influence but in the opposite direction of its original intent, embracing escapism. It is in that context that the rebuild movies exist. The first rebuild movie acts as a near-direct recreation of the first 6 episodes of the Evangelion anime. Nearly all the scenes are similar to the show, with the single exception of Misato showing Shinji Lilith and explaining the reason for why he is piloting the Eva. This can be seen as either giving a reason for Shinji to fight beyond his father demanding it and his desire to help others, thereby fixing a mistake of the show, or it can act as a way for the rebuild movies to show that this is a different timeline from the original anime. However, overall, the first rebuild movie is inconsequential and adds nothing of importance. The second rebuild movie is where the movies start becoming metatextual. Everything from this point changes from the original anime while still retaining versions of certain events but with severe alterations. The introduction of the character Mari at the beginning of the movie is the first sign to the audience that something is wrong. She is a literal idealized anime character in a setting where such a person should not even be allowed to exist. She introduces herself by way of a song, that it is good to move forward no matter what, even if some steps back happen, because that's just life. Unlike the characters from the original Evangelion anime that struggle with overcoming loneliness and are unable to find happiness, Mari already has the answers to the struggles of life and spells it out in a comically idealized manner. Even pain itself is seen as a positive because she is more of an archetype rather than feel like an actual character with flaws. The introduction of Asuka is another sign that something is very wrong. In one single attack, she defeats an angel with ease. In the Evangelion anime, although shown as skilled and competent, she never displayed excessive abilities as shown in the rebuild movies. This can be interpreted as the movie allowing Asuka to show her true worth that was never actualized in the show. But it is more subtle than that. After the angel is defeated, Misato introduces Asuka. What might have been missed is that Asuka's surname was changed from Asuka Langley Soryu to Asuka Shikinami Langley. She is a different character entirely. This random name change, although somewhat minor, shows a correlation and connection between Rei, Asuka, and Mari. All three have Nami at the end of their surname. The kanji's meaning is wave, but it could also mean average, ordinary, and common. In a way, this implies that each of the girls have become indistinguishable from any other character from their archetype, just as Rei is no different from the many clones of herself. When the 8th angel shows up, the aesthetics, movement, and fighting styles of the Eva also change. They are fast and less sluggish, especially when compared to the original anime. Unit 01 runs so fast that it even breaks the sound barrier. It is from this fight that the movie tips its hand and diverges significantly from the anime. After this scene, none of the characters retain any semblance of who they were from the original anime. Both Rei and Asuka start to care deeply for Shinji. Even Gendo acts out of character and accepts that he should pay more attention to Shinji. Rei begins to cook for Shinji, and people notice that she is becoming more open to others. The movie even pokes fun at itself by noticing that Rei is acting uncharacteristically. And then, Asuka herself starts cooking for Shinji, like a typical tsundere. Something, again, she would never do in the anime. Both Rei and Asuka have quick and easy character development that was never in the anime. Rei goes out of her way to thank Asuka out of the blue. And near the end of the movie, Asuka has a moment of introspection with Masato by recognizing the value of forming bonds with others rather than only relying on herself for everything. In a subtle way, all these moments are slaps to the face of the audience by intentionally betraying the Evangelion anime in all manners. It is as if the movie has become a fanfiction of itself, giving the audience what it thought it wanted. The characters recognizing their own personal flaws, doing 180s at the drop of a hat, and randomly developing a romantic interest in Shinji, it's all completely ridiculous. The famous elevator scene is a good example of an atmospheric change from the original anime. In the show, the elevator scene lasted over 50 seconds, forcing the audience to feel the tension between the characters. In the 2.0 movie, merely 10 seconds is given before the tension is broken, as if the movie perceived that the audience thought that the length was somehow a flaw and corrected it. And nothing encapsulates a divergence of characterization more than with Rei standing up for herself by blocking Asuka's blow to the face. The movie has endless small changes that make no sense within its own characterization, context, and established lore. By the end of the movie, Rei has been absorbed by the 10th angel and is to be lost forever. Yet Shinji is not deterred and does the impossible. Rei attempts to tell him that there will be others like her and that he should move on. This can be interpreted as Rei telling the audience not to care so much about her, as she is simply an anime character, but Shinji, acting as the audience surrogate, says that he is unwilling to move on. He only wants her and does not desire anything else. The world can go to hell for all he cares, just as long as he's able to be with her again. Shinji defies both fate and the laws of his universe to save Rei. The climax of the movie is the contextualization of its existence. Shinji has rejected his own setting to save the girl he wants, winning over reality to remain in escapism. In part 3 of his video series on understanding disasters, the YouTuber Joe from Pause and Select describes how Evangelion is the grandfather of the saqué genre. Joe's video ends with a question that the Evangelion anime and the end of Evangelion movie pose to the Japanese audience.
Evangelion hit on some very sore, painful points about who we were, are, and will become. The story of Evangelion, of Saikano, of Iria no Sora, of Hoshi no Koi are stories of Kobe, the bubble burst, of Om, and how society's young men and women looked at these issues and asked, where do I go from here?
To which the Japanese people said, nowhere. I keep stagnating and regressing, doing nothing as I reject reality and indulge further into escapism. Despite Evangelion's attempt to reject the symbolic in favor of the real, it was incomplete. As a result, the response to Evangelion was to focus on specific elements that struggle with accepting reality and use them to further enhance escapism.
So what are sekai? Well, we don't really have a precise definition. Stephanie Thomas has done an incredibly thorough outlining of various definitions of sekai, noting that several Japanese cultural critics have different metrics and measurements for what it is. For instance, Kasai Kiyoshi defines it as a group of work in which the male protagonist and heroine have a personal relationship alongside a large problem like a world crisis. In comparison, Satoshi Maejima in his book What is Sekai notes the difficulty of defining it, but nevertheless describes it as a small story between a boy and a girl, a story where the girl fights but the boy doesn't, and the end of the world threat is opaque. Uno Tsunehiro defines it as a series of otaku-type works which remove concepts such as society and nation while extending one's own feelings or self-consciousness to perceive them on the scope of the world. Christopher Howard extends that definition by adding on to the school as a socialization and what he calls the protective sensation of moe as relationship rather than anything particularly sexual. Miyadai Shinji defines sakaike as school day or domestic dramas that are confined to the protagonist's inner world. In a talk with Kaiichiro Morikawa moderated by Takashi Murakami, Gainax co-founder Toshio Okada defines sakaike as narratives where personal feelings are weighted evenly with the fate of the world. In short, sakaike is prone to imprecise definitions. However, and this is important, most people agree on what defines quintessential sakaike fiction. Most of the scholars I noted all agree, save for Morikawa, that Eva is a preliminary, malformed sakaike fiction at best, but it stands as sort of a grandfather fiction. But again, what service is this particular story type? What is it addressing? Uno Tsunohiro notes in his book The Imagination of the 2000s that sakaike fiction as a result of the socio-cultural changes can be understood as withdrawal fiction. Tsunohiro compares Shinji's withdrawal as recollective of the hikikomori. In this context, sakaike stories can be considered apocalyptic settings that focus on withdrawal, particularly into realms of the pure imaginary. Tanaka notes that the attraction of sakaike works is related to the phenomenon of acute social withdrawal known as hikikomori that began to be recognized as a serious social problem in Japan in the late 1990s. In addition to the rise of the Neets and Frieders, it would seem that the maturation of Japanese society seemed impossible for an increasing number of Japanese youth. But again, what does sakaike ultimately say? Well, it depends on who you talk to. Tanaka believes that sakaike works satisfy the desire of omnipotence by allowing their protagonists to indirectly control the world through their empowered girlfriends and negate the experiences of resignation, refusal, and loss. Komori Kentaro shares a similar sentiment, equating effort with growth, and in contrast, sakaike protagonists do not grow up, forge friendships, or win. Summed up simply, they do not become adults.
But the sakaike genre is merely one of Evangelion's many influences. As Patrick Galbraith notes from the otaku scholar Okada Toshio, moe is strongly felt among third-generation otaku or Japanese born in the 1980s who watched Neon Genesis Evangelion in middle school and grew up amid a wealth of anime, manga, games, and character merchandise following the seminal anime series. Patrick Galbraith also quotes Azuma Hiroki, who argues that the tipping point of moe culture originates from Evangelion. Rei is the synthesis of different character types, a clone of the protagonist's mother, housing the soul of an otherworldly being in the body of an adolescent girl. The doll-like semi-human Ayanami became the single most popular and influential character in the history of otaku anime. Fans still isolate part of the character to amplify and re-articulate in fan-produced works to inspire moe. Patrick Galbraith equally quotes the author Shingo. Ayanami Rei is the vision of a pure character in the original Neon Genesis Evangelion. She is a 14-year-old virgin who in turn plays the role of both mother and daughter for various characters. She is also a clone and carries the soul of an angel, a non-human entity separate from reality, and so a form of pure fantasy. Despite her myriad persona, it is notable that Ayanami does not play the role of a lover or wife. The original does not provide desires that can be consummated. However, in fan re-articulation, made in the pursuit of moe, she is the target for mating and marriage, or the axis is increased to the maximum. It is precisely because of these ranges in the moe spectrum were not explored in the original narrative that they were exposed as virtual possibilities of the fantasy form of the character. Importantly, Ayanami can be both an entity to be nurtured and one that is highly sexualized at the same time. This otaku obsession with Rei and her relationship with moe culture is further emphasized in the sakaike genre, with authors that directly attempt to replicate her in their own fiction.
Rei is valuable because she exists as a pure insert of the reader's imaginary exercise, and that exercise is valuable because it, as Christopher Howard notes, helps overcome the otaku viewer's supposed anxiety over the sense of loss experienced in successful symbolic integration. Therefore, this loss of confidence is because in the real world, to many Japanese, it seemed to have failed. Sakai fiction juxtaposes close relationships with broad catastrophes because that is the form broad social failure was registered in the early to mid-90s. Close personal relationships, broad catastrophe, failures of the in-between. Iria no Sora is a particularly interesting case because Akiyama Mizuhito made it as a direct response to Evangelion, with Thomas noting that Mizuhito deliberately conceptualized his light novel series as UFO Ayanami, i.e. he wrote a narrative in which a girl resembling the most popular Evangelion character pilots a UFO and fights. All of them focus on girls that fight. In Saikano, Chise is the one who fights. In Hoshi no Koi, Mikako is the one who fights. In Iria no Sora, Iria is the one that fights. As an imperfect Sekai piece, Evangelion has male and female fighters, but Shinji's dependence on the female figures at moments nevertheless stresses the female fighter in both a girlfriend-mother condition. In fact, Tamaki Saito makes an incredibly useful distinction in Beautiful Fighting Girl, stating that the reason a character like Rei is so beloved is because she represents a phallic girl, a girl that Saito notes represents a total lack of material existence. Saito then goes on to note that while what he calls a Western space tries to anchor fiction in reality to some perspective, a Japanese space does not insist on that anchor. In other words, Ayanami to the Japanese otaku exists as a purely fictionalized force that represents the complete loss of the symbolic. She's a purely imaginary force.
Despite Evangelion's best intention with its themes against escapism, it became the catalyst of moe culture and a deeper dive into obsessive attachment and escapism. This is why Rei is the character being saved at the end of the 2.0 movie. And it is in that context that the 3.33 rebuild movie seeks to criticize its audience and what came after the original Evangelion anime. When people on the internet decried that the 3.33 rebuild movie is not their Eva, they are half correct. The movie depicts the metaphorical remains of the Evangelion franchise from years of fan devotion that focused more on the superficial aspects of the characters and the setting itself, rather than learning about the warning it tried to send about escapism and the message about embracing reality. Shinji sought to save Rei from eternal nothingness, and succeeded. But he did so at the cost of embracing escapism wholeheartedly, and doomed the world as a result. Metaphorically, Shinji attempted to make his waifu real and sacrifice the entire world. The result is a literal empty hellscape. When Asaka and Shinji are reunited, the first thing he notices is that neither of them have changed physically. This is not simply a literal curse of piloting an Eva, but also the figurative unintended side effect of Evangelion as a franchise. Everyone in the world has moved on, but despite nearly 14 years having passed since the release of the End of Evangelion movie and the 3.33 rebuild movie, the audience are still the same. Nothing has changed. Acting as the audience surrogate, Shinji desired to save Rei based on her superficiality of being a representation of symbolical nothingness, and a desire for escapism for its own sake. This is why the surname of Nami is applied to Asaka and Mari in the rebuild movies. Metaphorically, Shinji saved all waifus. The reason why Rei was the one that was specifically saved was because her character is the most popular Evangelion girl by far. It is no coincidence that for all his trouble, Shinji is not rewarded the Rei he knew and desired, but a Rei Q that is nothing like her. In Joe's Understanding Apocalypse video, it is inferred that the Japanese general attraction to Rei and her alterations comes from the representation that she is a symbolic non-entity. And so, this is exactly what Shinji is given. a literal body doll that does nothing, says nothing, stays in her box, and awaits orders. Rei Q is a literal nothingness except for being physical. And despite Shinji attempting to interact with her and trying to make her act as the old Rei by giving her books for her to read, showing that he has a superficial understanding of Rei as a person, she does nothing unless she is ordered to. Rei Q cannot be like Rei because she is a literal representation of the misunderstanding that the audience has of Rei as a character. The message from the movie is clear. This is what fans wanted, and this is what it would look like if people were given waifus. However, Shinji is unable to accept the emptiness of his desires. Having a literal nothingness which he cannot interact with is devoid of meaning. Escapism leads nowhere but your own base desires. While Rebuild Rei represents the surface level's desires that stem from seeking escapism, Kaoru represents the path towards salvation. After being saved by Rei Q, Shinji is brought to nerve and encounters Kaoru playing piano. Kaoru is an interesting character both in the Evangelion anime and in the 3.33 Rebuild movie. He acts as the only true attachment for Shinji and spells out the themes to the audience. When Kaoru offers the opportunity to play piano, Shinji is reluctant.
やってみなよ。
いいよ。僕には無理だよ。
生きていくためには新しいことを始める変化も大切だ。簡単さ。君はこっちで鍵盤を叩くだけでいいんだ。
His message is simple. Interacting with the world is easy. All you have to do is try. While people have decried the scenes with Shinji and Kaoru for being very gay, it nevertheless conveys an important idea to the audience on how to find happiness.
どうしたらもっとうまく弾けるのかな。
うまく弾く必要はないよ。ただ気持ちのいい音を出せばいい。
じゃあもっといい音を出したいんだけど、どうすればいい？
反復練習さ。同じことを何度も繰り返す。自分がいいなって感じられるまでね。それしかない。
Music, as with all art, just requires practice. It is by learning about the world, interacting with it, and creating something new that a sense of personal accomplishment is formed. Happiness is ultimately the result of major life-affirming achievements and life-sustaining values. Acting properly over a long period of time and being proud of who you are as a person and your accomplishments. Understanding the world and being creative, either with art or any other means with enough practice, will lead to inner meaning and self-worth. But the problem is that Shinji, representing the audience, rejects reality by being afraid of change, and thus resort to escapism.
その変化に耐えきれず、辛いんだね。
もう嫌だ！何もしたくない！
As Shinji and Kaoru spend more time together, Shinji opens up to him and says something crucial.
14年くらいじゃ何にも変わらないのが嬉しいっていうか、自分のことなんてどうでもいい気がして落ち着くっていうか。
This is an interesting confession because Shinji speaks for the audience. 14 years have passed between the release of the End of Evangelion movie and the 3.33 Rebuild movie, yet, on the surface, nothing has changed. All the main characters look the same as they always have, and it gives the audience a sense of comfort. Kaoru picks up on that and directly spells out the metatext of the movie.
うまく言えないよ。
君の気持ちは伝わるよ。変化を求めず、虚無と無慈悲な深淵の世界を好む。
The movie is explicitly explaining that this empty world is a direct outcome of the audience desiring an escape from reality.
君が初号機と同化している間に起こったサードインパクトの結果だよ。すべてのきっかけは君なんだよ。
違う。僕はただ綾波を助けたかっただけだ。
This is the curse of Eva that Asuka mentions when reuniting with Shinji. It is the unintended consequences of the creation of Evangelion itself. It tried to warn people against escaping reality, yet people used the franchise as a tool for their own escapism. People related superficially to the characters, desired them, formed their own empty escapist world around them, and never properly accepted reality, causing the characters to eternally remain static and corrupt the very meaning of Evangelion. The final words of Kaoru to Shinji builds on this idea.
カオル君、僕はどうしたらいいの？
魂が消えても願いと呪いはこの世界に残る。意志は情報として世界を伝え変えていく。いつか自分自身のことも書き換えていくんだ。ごめん、これは君の望む幸せではなかった。
The line, "Your wishes," may be interpreted as the desired impact your art and legacy would have on the world, while curses may be the unintended consequences and misinterpretation from imposing your will. This can be tied to another scene where Fuyutsuki plays a game of shogi with Shinji.
世界を崩すことは造作もない。だが作り直すとなるとそうもいかん。時と同じく世界に可逆性はないからな。人の心にも。
By outright name-calling the rebuild movies, it directly informs the audience the intent of the meta-narrative. It is a lamentation of the reaction that the audience had of the Evangelion franchise, which it continues to have with the rebuild movies. Although the message is bittersweet, the movie remains optimistic to a degree. Create art. Find meaning despite the fact that you've wasted much of your life embracing escapism and running away. It is never too late to find happiness. It builds on the previous themes by emphasizing that you should do more than simply embrace reality and declare self-acceptance. You should learn how the world works and create something new. Your will on the world may be misinterpreted after it is imposed, but it is nevertheless worth doing. Even if you've wasted much of your time in escapism, you are still alive. There is always hope. Neon Genesis Evangelion is a series that has always been misunderstood by its audience as a result of caring too deeply into either its lore or characters, but not enough into its themes. It blatantly tells its audience to embrace reality, to seek self-acceptance, to find meaning in the world, to create attachments, and to not be afraid in the attempt of forming connections. But, unfortunately, the same people that have dismissed the rest of the series by caring too deeply for it in the wrong way have done the same by dismissing the 3.33 rebuild movie. And that is the curse of Evangelion.
Country, and you wait with a smile. Your beauty is beyond belief. Love is chosen. We lie softly entwined, but it will not last this time. Oh, you're only a dream, but sad as it seems, your emptiness makes my heart die. I need to escape, to abandon this place, need reality, not your blue eyes. Consider this a victory, raise your flag up high. I succumb, my friend, this is goodbye.